Yes, hello, my name is Arthur Forrest. Thank you for looking at this video. In this video I'm going to look at the verb tenses I think you should know, and I've divided it into two parts. So there's two parts. The first part will look at the present tense, the present continuous, the future with going to, and the past tense, or the simple past tense. And the second video I'll look at the past continuous, the present perfect, and the present perfect continuous. I think it's essential to know these ones in conversation because you hear them all the time. Now, grammar is not exciting. However, it's essential to know what you're doing so you can speak with confidence. If your concern is getting a better grade on a test, being able to understand this better so you can do well in an exam or a term paper or a business application, this is not the video for you. What I'm focusing on here is what you hear in conversation. Also, I should point out this video is really intended for someone who's an intermediate to advanced level already. However, I find that even people who are in an intermediate to advanced level, they still default to making certain errors. One thing I hear, for example, is people using the present continuous tense when they should be using the present tense, or people confusing the third person singular don't with doesn't. Now those kind of things, once you become aware of them, they're relatively easy to fix if you focus on them. Before I move on, I just wanted to say there's a big difference between what you can get away with in speaking and what you can get away with in writing. So let's move on then. The first verb tense I want to talk about is the simple present tense. This tense indicates a habitual or repeated action. For example, I go to the store every day. I drive my car every day. I work from home during the pandemic. And this list goes on and on and on and on. There's many examples of when you use this verb tense. The most common mistake people make with it is the third person singular, which I mentioned before, confusing doesn't with don't, and saying he don't instead of he doesn't, which is not really a good idea. This is something you learn to, basically in the first couple of months of studying English, if you're in middle school or high school. And if you're still making that mistake 20 years later, then fix it. The next verb tense I want to talk about is the present continuous, and this is number 3. For example, I am walking, she is talking, we are working, etc. This verb tense indicates an action that you are doing right now, and it's an action that's ongoing. For example, I am looking into the camera. You are listening to this program. This verb tense is very common, but sometimes it's overused by people who are learning English as a second language or as an additional language. Sometimes you hear people say things like, she is having a wonderful time when she comes to visit me. Well, that should be, she has a wonderful time when she comes to visit me. Or, I am brushing my teeth every day. Well, that's good for you, but you brush your teeth every day. So, these things also, these are easy fixes if you pay attention to them. And if you realize you do this, then you should pay attention to it and try and fix it. Number 4, the future tense. Now there's basically two ways to form this. There's the simple future, for example, I will go, she will go, the opossum will fall out of the tree if he or she is not careful. This is a very easy verb tense because all you need to do is remember the words will and won't. The other form of the future tense is formed with going to, like I am going to, or we are going to, and then you stick in a verb. I am going to drink my coffee. I am going to prepare dinner. We are going to study very hard and pass the test. So those are the two forms. They're very easy and they're very basic. So I will move on, or I am going to move on. I did want to add a footnote to the talking about the future tense because, for example, If you use a simple future, you say I will go, or you say I'm going to go. Sometimes people say, well, you use the simple future I will when you're indicating something that's more definite, and going to when something's less definite. Perhaps that's true, but in my experience, I find these are used interchangeably in everyday speech. However, if you're writing a test and they tell you that will is indicates more of a certainty, well, tell them what you want to know in a test. So going back to speech, everyday speech, I find they're commonly mixed up or used interchangeably. In speech, a lot has to do with how quickly you want to answer. If somebody asks you a question, and if you use the simple future tense, it doesn't give you much time to think, because you say, will you do such and such? You say, I'll do it. Maybe you don't want to do it. So you can drag that out by using the future with going to. You say, will you do something? You say, well, okay, yes, I'm going to do it. So that gives you time to think about it and time to give a response. So the certainty in the future tense comes with the way you say it, not so much as a form of how it's constructed in grammatical English. For example, if you say, oh, I owe you money, I'll pay you tomorrow. That doesn't sound very convincing. But if you say, oh, I owe you money, I am going to pay you tomorrow, it sounds much more definite. So the certainty comes in how you say something. A wishy-washy future tense is not going to convince anybody, and certainly not your creditors. The final comment on this is if somebody, a good rule of thumb, if somebody asks you a question in the simple future tense, well, answer them in the simple future. And conversely, if somebody asks you a question in the future with going to, answer them in that tense. For example, you say, will you be joining us for dinner? And you say, yes, I will join you for dinner. Or someone says to you, are you going to join us for dinner? And you can say, yes, I am going to join you for dinner. Thank you very much. And thank you very much. The last verb tense I want to talk about in this video is the simple past. Like I go, I went, I walked, I talked, I listened, anything. Typically, you can form this verb tense by adding ed, which is nice and easy. However, there's two howevers. The first, however, is the pronunciation, because that ed ending is never pronounced ed, although that's exactly what it looks like. It can be pronounced with an id sound, like I wanted id, or I talked, then you have a t sound, or I listened, and then you have a d sound. So you can have a d sound or a t sound or an id sound, but you never have an ed sound, although that's exactly the way it is spelled. And I'm sorry, that's the way English is. There are hundreds of verbs you can do that with, adding the ed and forming the past tense. But of course, this is the other however. You have 5% of verbs that are irregular, and you have to memorize the past tense and the past participle. Saying it's 5%, that sounds, wow, that's great. However, that 5% is what you use in 95% of conversation. So it's extremely important. You just have to memorize these irregular past tenses. Now, some people may say, well, that's a little difficult. However, when you learn Chinese, you have to learn 5,000 characters. If you learn French or German, French, for example, you have to learn which words are masculine, which words are feminine. So there's lots of idiosyncrasies in each language, and this is one of those idiosyncrasies in English. So you just have to learn them. One final comment is what I'd like to mention is why do people repeat mistakes? People have a verb pattern or pronunciation that the people will correct them, but they make the same mistake over and over again. I think there's two reasons. The first reason is people simply get used to what works for them, and it's the first thing that comes out of their mouth. And that's very, very common, and it's difficult to overcome once you get used to it. The other reason is people say, well, it makes more sense the way I do it. You know, for example, if you say, I have one apple, I have two apple, and you say, no, you're supposed to say I have one apple, I have two apples. You go say, why? Why do you have to put a plural ending on when you've got a word in front of it that indicates how many already? It's redundant. You know, why do you have to do that? Well, there is no why. Or the other example is, which, you know, makes tons of sense to me. Unfortunately, they don't do it in English. Is you say, why do you have verb tenses? You say, I go today. Okay, simple present tense. I go tomorrow. Okay, in English you're supposed to use the future and say, I will go tomorrow. And then someone says, well, why? Why do you have a future indicator already with the word tomorrow? Why do you also have to have it reflected in the verb tense? Unfortunately, you do. And so in English, there is no why sometimes. You just have to learn it. And best of luck.